Some people never realize how strong they've been until they look back and see how far they've come. Pisces is like that. You've walked through years where others only saw the outcome, never the quiet nights, never the moments you had to hold yourself together, just to believe that things would somehow be okay. If you're listening to this right now, you might be standing in a very unfamiliar space. You don't want to go back to the past anymore, but you can't quite name what's waiting for you ahead. You're not tired in the old way. It's different now. It feels like one chapter of life has quietly closed, as if your soul has just finished a long journey, and for the first time, it's standing still, just to breathe. This video isn't here to tell you that you need to change. It's here to remind you of something softer than that. Maybe you were never lost. Maybe you were just completing a full cycle of your destiny. And from this moment on, the real story of Pisces is only just beginning. Pisces often walks very far before realizing just how far they've gone. Not because you enjoy hardship, but because you've always believed that if you were patient enough, gentle enough, open enough, everything would eventually find its place. There are stretches of your journey no one ever witnessed. No one saw the moments you chose silence instead of explanation. No one knew you stayed longer than you should have, simply because you couldn't bring yourself to let go. And very few people understood why you kept believing in things that had never been proven. But that doesn't mean you were naive. It may simply mean you were willing to walk an entire path, even without knowing where it would lead. At times, Pisces wonders whether they've been going the wrong way, why the same emotions keep circling back, why old lessons seem to repeat through different faces, and why you always seem to be the one who feels more deeply, hurts longer, and remembers longer. Yet if you look back slowly enough, you may notice something else. You were never standing still. You were moving. Your path just wasn't loud. It wasn't straight. And it didn't come with clear signposts, like everyone else's. Every time you chose to stay, you learned something about your limits. Every disappointment clarified what truly mattered to you. And every time you believed in something that hadn't arrived yet, you were building a very quiet kind of strength. Not everyone has the courage to complete a full cycle like that. Many stop earlier. Many turn away faster. Many close themselves off, just so they don't have to feel anymore. But you didn't. You kept going, even when it was only one small step at a time. That may be why, now, something feels different inside you. You're not as restless. You're not driven to prove anything. Just a subtle sense that you've been here long enough. You don't need to go back and fix the past. You don't need to explain why you made the choices you did. And you don't need to blame yourself for believing too much. None of it was wasted. Every experience has already done its work. Some lessons aren't meant to make you strong right away. They arrive to help you understand more deeply, to understand people, to understand fragility, and to understand yourself. When faced with what you cannot control, you may not clearly see what comes next, but you can feel that you're no longer at the beginning. You've walked far enough to know you don't want to repeat old cycles, far enough to recognize what you can no longer carry with you. And if there's one thing worth pausing for in this moment, it's this quiet acknowledgement that you were never lost. You were simply closing a journey that has now been completed. From here, there's no need to rush. Just allow yourself to stand still for a moment, to breathe, and to listen. Because sometimes, after you've walked far enough, the most important thing isn't moving forward right away, but realizing you arrived here with everything sincere you had to give. The ending of a cycle doesn't always arrive with clear signs. There is no thunder, no dramatic moment that forces you to stop. and suddenly realize what's happening. Sometimes it's just an ordinary morning when you wake up and notice that inside you no longer want to hold on to the things that once caused you pain, not because you've forgotten, but because you've understood enough to know you don't need to keep carrying them anymore. Pisces rarely closes doors with sharp movements. You leave very quietly, so quietly that sometimes you don't even realize you've left. You simply stop trying. You stop explaining. You stop waiting for something to finally change. Not because you've become colder, but because you no longer want to spend your energy on what keeps draining you. There may have been a time when you thought letting go would hurt much more. You imagined long, empty spaces, a sense of loss you wouldn't be able to name. But what actually happens feels different. Instead of pain, there's a quiet sense of relief, not happiness. Just less weight than before, like setting down a suitcase you've been carrying for far too long, even though you can no longer remember what was inside it. The relationships that once kept you awake at night no longer take up much space in your thoughts. Unclear promises, uncertain connections, roles you carried on behalf of others. Little by little, they slip from your hands. There's no need for anger, no need for blame. They simply no longer fit the person you are becoming. Some dreams you once chased weren't born from true desire, but from the belief that you should want them, because someone believed in you, because you didn't want to disappoint, because you were used to being the one others leaned on. And then, quietly, you realize you've lived too long, inside expectations that were never yours. That realization doesn't arrive loudly. It comes gently, and it goes deep. You begin to sense the difference between what you truly want and what you once worked so hard to maintain. You stop forcing yourself to stay in places where you have to shrink or strain to fit. You stop convincing yourself that if you just try a little harder, everything will be okay. Instead, you slow down, and in that slowing, you hear your inner voice more clearly. The maturity of the soul doesn't always look like achievement. It doesn't need recognition. Sometimes it's simply the moment. You no longer react the way you used to. The things that once wounded you no longer have the power to pull you under. Not because you've hardened, but because you've learned where your limits are. You stop trying to rescue what has already reached its natural ending. You stop holding on to connections that survive only through one-sided sacrifice. You let them go without dramatic goodbyes. And in that silence, something deeply human is taking place. You are learning how to respect yourself without hurting anyone else. The old cycle doesn't close to erase what came before. It closes because its work is done. Those experiences taught you how to feel, how to love, and how to let go when letting go becomes necessary. And maybe, right here in this quiet space, you're stepping into a new season of life, one where you no longer have to prove that you deserve peace. If you find yourself in this moment, there may be nothing you need to do. No big decisions, no immediate changes, just the permission to stop carrying what's already ready, to be set down. Because sometimes, the deepest form of growth doesn't come from starting something new, but from having the courage to gently close what has ended in silence. After the old cycle closes in silence, something begins to come into focus. Even though you were never searching for it, it doesn't arrive like a shock. It comes slowly, steadily, and deep enough that you can no longer ignore it. These are the truths you once avoided looking at directly, not because you didn't know them, but because you were still hoping things might turn out differently if you just tried a little harder. Pisces begins to realize that not everyone is meant to walk with you all the way to the end. Some people appear only to travel beside you for a while, long enough to teach you something, and then take another path. Before, you tried to hold on. You believed that if you were more understanding, more patient, more gentle, the connection wouldn't fall apart. But the truth is, some relationships don't end because love was missing. They end because their purpose has been fulfilled. You also begin to understand that not every pain needs to be rescued. Some wounds don't need to be healed by reopening them again and again. They only need to be acknowledged and gently set down. Pisces is used to being the one who stays, the one who listens, the one who tries to understand the darkness in others. But at some point, you realize you cannot carry all the sorrow of the world on your shoulders and still expect to keep peace within yourself. This truth doesn't arrive to make you distant or cold. On the contrary, it helps you understand the value of discernment. Discernment isn't about rejecting people. It's about protecting your own life energy. You begin to recognize the difference between healthy empathy and sacrifice that slowly drains you. And this awareness doesn't make you love less. It simply gives your love clearer boundaries. Another realization surfaces as well, quiet and unmistakably real. Not every life situation requires your sacrifice to survive. Not every circumstance needs your endurance in order to continue existing. Before, you believed that if you walked away, everything would fall apart. But then you see that the world keeps moving. People continue living, and sometimes your withdrawal is actually what's best for everyone, including yourself. This truth may make you quiet for a while, not because you're sad, but because you're reorganizing your inner world. You stop reacting so quickly. You stop explaining. You stop proving. You observe more. You listen more, and you begin to trust your inner knowing more than promises coming from the outside. What matters is this. This truth doesn't make you shut your heart. It doesn't make you suspicious of everything. Instead, it opens the door to a new kind of freedom. Freedom from the need to save someone in order to feel worthy. Freedom from the role of enduring pain to earn love. And freedom from the belief that you must trade yourself away to keep a connection alive. Pisces begins to understand that real love doesn't require your disappearance. Your presence has value, even when you don't sacrifice yourself. And you deserve relationships where you don't have to strain just to exist. Recognizing this doesn't make you selfish. It simply makes you more honest with yourself. You may not be able to name everything that's shifting inside you yet, but you can clearly feel the relief that comes from no longer carrying what was never yours to hold. The truths you once avoided are no longer frightening. They didn't come to break you. They came to return to you, a space where you can truly live. And within that space, you begin to breathe more easily. You begin to see life without the veil of obligation or guilt. This release isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's simply the feeling of coming home to yourself without asking permission, without proving anything, and without needing to rescue anyone, just to feel that you deserve to exist. After those inner truths have finally been faced, a very simple question begins to appear. It isn't loud. It doesn't push. It's just quietly there, clear enough that you can't ignore it. What do I truly want? Not what makes others comfortable, not the familiar roles you once carried, but the things that make you feel lighter just by thinking about them. Pisces is used to listening to everyone else's needs before listening to their own. You sense what people want. You adjust easily. You place other people's emotions first. But at some point, you realize you've gone far too long without asking yourself the most important question. Not because you forgot, but because you never gave yourself permission to come first. This moment doesn't look like rebellion. You don't cut everything off. You don't announce a life transformation. You simply begin choosing differently, very gently. You stop organizing your life around being loved, being validated, or being understood. You understand that those things may come, or they may not. And you no longer place your entire worth in outside responses. You start paying closer attention to how you feel. In small decisions, an invitation that leaves you drained, a conversation that feels heavy, an environment that asks you to strain, just to belong. Before, you would have tried a little harder. Now, you allow yourself to stop. No long explanations. No guilt. Peace becomes a new measure, not avoidance, but an inner steadiness that isn't constantly shaken. You begin to understand that fullness doesn't always come from adding more, but sometimes from no longer enduring what was never necessary. Your boundaries aren't walls that shut others out. They're spaces that allow you to breathe. When you set those boundaries, some people may feel unfamiliar with them. There may be surprise, even disappointment, but you no longer let those reactions define your value. You understand that caring for yourself is not selfish. It's a basic form of respect for the life you are living. Pisces begins to sense their own rhythm more clearly. You stop rushing to meet expectations that were never yours. You stop comparing your path to someone else's. You move slower, but with more certainty. You choose what allows you to be fully present rather than what only asks you to keep pushing. A very subtle shift takes place. You stop searching for meaning in other people's eyes. You find it instead in ordinary moments, a quiet morning, a decision that feels honest, a day that ends without exhaustion from pretending to be someone else. Returning to yourself doesn't mean controlling everything. It simply means knowing what belongs to you and what doesn't. You stop handing over the definition of happiness to circumstances or to other people. You accept that life will still be uncertain at times, but you trust your ability to adjust from within. In this state, you don't need to prove that you've changed. The change shows itself in what you choose, what you decline, and what you stay with, because it genuinely nourishes you. You don't need to say that you're living for yourself now. It's already visible in the way you move through the world. And perhaps this is the moment Pisces begins to feel that they're finally in the right place. Not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer abandon yourself just to fit in. You move more slowly, more deeply, more honestly. No noise, no display. Just being true to yourself is enough. When you stop returning to familiar cycles, something very subtle begins to happen. Not a miracle, not a loud turning point, just doors you never noticed before, suddenly appearing within your view. Maybe because your perspective has shifted. Maybe because you're no longer standing in the same place. Or maybe life is simply responding to the way you've begun treating yourself. You're no longer trying to prove that you're worthy. You stop repeating choices that leave you exhausted. And when that pattern ends, your inner energy begins to change. You become clearer about what you're willing to receive and what no longer needs your pursuit. That clarity doesn't need explanation. It shows itself in how you move, in small decisions made with consistency. A new direction begins to reveal itself in very ordinary ways. Not a completely unfamiliar road, but a turn you once overlooked because you were too busy meeting outside expectations. Now, as you allow yourself to slow down, you notice that path is still there. It doesn't promise absolute safety, but it feels honest. And sometimes, that feeling alone is enough to take a step. At the same time, Opportunities around money begin to change shape. Not because you're chasing wealth, but because you're no longer draining yourself. When you stop giving beyond your limits, you begin to receive in more balanced ways. A new source of income may emerge from using your abilities more sustainably, from choosing environments that don't require you to trade your health or your values. You don't need to do more. You simply need to do what's aligned. The version of you in this phase is no longer as depleted as before, not because life has become easier, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. You rest when rest is needed. You say no when something doesn't feel right. You stop seeing exhaustion as the price of being accepted. And when you treat your body and mind with that level of respect, your energy begins to return in a natural way. There are days when you realize you're no longer being tested in the old ways. Situations that once overwhelmed you no longer carry the same weight. Not because they disappeared, but because you no longer place yourself in the position of carrying everything. Life feels less confrontational, less determined to pull you back into old loops. Instead, it responds to the calm and clarity you're cultivating. This cooperation isn't a contract. It's the result of an internal adjustment. When you live in closer rhythm with yourself, the world around you begins to adjust as well. The right people appear, the right opportunities move closer, and what no longer fits leaves on its own without force. You begin to believe that survival doesn't have to be a constant struggle. Not every stretch of life is a test. Some seasons simply invite you to experience what it feels like, to move with the current. You don't abandon yourself. You remain aware, but you stop resisting what hasn't fully revealed itself yet. In this state, you learn how to receive support, opportunities that arrive at the right time, a sense of enough, without the weight of obligation. This doesn't change who you are. You're still sensitive, still caring, still deep. The difference is, you no longer exhaust yourself trying to prove it. A meaningful life doesn't open because everything becomes perfect. It opens because you stop closing yourself off. You allow life to come closer in a new way, without fighting, without enduring. And within that permission, you begin to sense that the road ahead, even if unclear, feels far lighter than anything you've already carried. At some point, Pisces begins to understand that what you've just lived through was never a loss. Nothing was truly taken from you. No part of you was left behind. It was simply a journey that completed its purpose, quietly closing, the same way every cycle in nature does. You didn't lose your youth by loving with your whole heart. You didn't waste time by believing in what hadn't arrived yet. And you didn't lose yourself by sacrificing to preserve certain connections. All of it shaped who you are now with a depth not everyone carries. And if you look back slowly enough, you can see that you've completed a full circle far enough that there's no need to return. This moment doesn't feel like a sad ending. There's no emptiness, no sense of collapse. Instead, it feels like a morning after long rain, when the air becomes clearer and you can breathe deeply without holding yourself tight. You're no longer caught between old choices. You're no longer pulled back into familiar roles. You're standing in a very still place where beginning again doesn't require denying what came before. Pisces starts to see that destiny isn't a fixed script. It's more like background music, and once you've lived enough, you're allowed to change the rhythm. You're not resisting life. You're simply no longer living inside patterns that slowly wore you down. You step into a new phase, not through rebellion, but through permission. From this moment on, You don't need to become someone else to live well. You only need to return to your true nature with clearer awareness and healthier boundaries. Your gentleness hasn't disappeared. It's just no longer being taken from you. Your sensitivity hasn't weakened. It's simply been placed where it belongs. And your compassion is still there, but it no longer costs you yourself. A beginning doesn't mean starting from zero. A beginning means carrying everything you've learned and choosing to live differently. You're no longer guided by the fear of losing someone. You no longer let uncertainty decide your direction. You allow yourself to live more consciously, more slowly, but with greater stability. There may still be difficult days ahead. There may still be moments of confusion. But the difference now is that you no longer question your worth. Every time something goes wrong, you can adjust. You can pause, observe, and choose again. And this trust doesn't come from the outside. It comes from having gone far enough to truly know yourself. Pisces doesn't enter this new chapter with applause or bright lights. You enter quietly in your own way. And within that quiet, a deep strength is forming. The strength of someone no longer pulled into old cycles. The strength of someone who knows where they stand and doesn't rush to become anyone else. If there's a name for this phase, it isn't an ending. It's the birth of a new way of living. A life no longer built on endurance, but on conscious choice. A journey no longer defined by what you had to give up, but by what you now allow yourself to keep. And as you look ahead, you may not see everything clearly yet, but you can feel that you're moving in the right direction. Not because the path is easy, but because you no longer leave yourself behind. With every step, that may be the most important thing of all, and it may be the true beginning of the life you are now creating in the quiet, deeply personal way of Pisces.